Alright, so I'm pretty sure that all of you know what chocolate is.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be accurate? No.
I don't know what chocolate is.
Bill.
You are a liar and a fiend. And so, but everyone's had chocolate at some point, or at least has seen chocolate. And now, chocolate, we have some here. These are chocolate chips, semi-sweet morsels made by the Nestle company. But chocolate hasn't always been like this. It hasn't always been a solid, a sweet, or even recognizable as chocolate that we have today. And so, chocolate has been in Europe and America since about 1550. And so, for how much of that time do you guys think that chocolate has been sweet or solid, or it's something that you would recognize? For how much of the last few centuries do you think that chocolate has
200 years.
been?
Just under 100. Only like 100.
Okay, so our general consensus is within 100 to 200 years.
Yeah.
Okay, 100 to 200 years.
So, the first chocolate in the form that we recognize was made in 1879. And that was the first actually good, smooth chocolate that people had access to. That was actually sweet and actually had flavor and was delicious. But back in, say, 1200 BC, or sometime around there, I was supposed to have this slide up when we were doing that introduction. Whoops.
That's all right.
Where do I have? I should have practiced this a few more times. So, chocolate is actually native to South America, and it has been a big part of the cultures there.
Scoot back. Don't trip over that, please. Perfect. All right, sweet.
Haha, sweet.
So, chocolate has been a big part of Mesoamerican culture since the Olmecs, back 1500 years before Christ. And I don't think I need to tell you that having over 2,000 years of chocolate existing is not an insignificant amount of human history. But the first civilization to really use chocolate was the Olmecs, and as far as we know, they were the first. And they had a number of legends about it, but unfortunately most of the records are lost except for the implication that was used in several rituals. We know more about the Mayans and Aztecs and how they used chocolate. And something to note, this chocolate, it wasn't our chocolate. Let me be very clear. This chocolate was a spicy, bitter foam that people could drink. And this was mostly royalty, or the upper class of these cultures. But that doesn't mean that the lower class didn't have access to chocolate. During special occasions, there might be chocolate available, but for the most part, the cocoa bean was actually very interesting and very important as a currency that was used by the lower class and other people as well. In fact, a basket of cocoa beans was commonly given at weddings and as gifts.
Sounds like my kind of wedding.
I don't know if we tasted it. I've never had it before. It doesn't sound particularly tasty, but I've been told that it's very rich. Anyway, next slide.
Fix that later.
But 1521 is the year that
There we go.
1521 is the year that things changed for America. And that was when the Spaniards began their conquest. And what is the name?
Conquistadors?
It was, I was thinking of a specific conquistador, and I don't have it written down. Wow, I should have prepared more. But chocolate was first tasted by one of the conquistadors that went to visit the Aztec capital, and he was invited there by the emperor actually. And they had this incredibly distinct drink, which the Spaniards found quite interesting, quite compelling even. And what they decided to do after they were so graciously invited to the court and given these wonderful gifts,
Kill everyone.
Exactly! And so in 1521, almost immediately after they'd been invited to the courts, they attacked a peaceful festival and then laid siege to the city, and subsequently destroyed the entire Aztec civilization.
Aww.
But what they did do during this time was, in 1524, they had a shipment going back to Spain. And that shipment, which was received by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, had cocoa beans and cocoa bean equipment that would allow them to make the first cocoa drinks in Europe. And now, Spain was very secretive about this, and they were able to keep chocolate as exclusively a Spanish thing for 80 years.
Not bad.
And with globalization going on today, that seems a little bit crazy to keep such a big thing a secret for so long. But they enjoyed it in their courts, and it was something that the nobles greatly enjoyed, and they wanted it for themselves. In fact, they kept the secret so well that when a cargo ship filled with cocoa beans that is worth an absurd amount today, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, was entirely thrown overboard and burned by a group of pirates that attacked the ship because they had no idea what the cocoa beans were.
Morons.
Well, pirates aren't known for their high intelligence,
Good point.
and so they kept it as their own delicious drink that they began to mix sugar into for the first time for 80 years. Later, when later in 1615, when King Louis XIII was having his wedding in Spain, he was able to find chocolate there, and he didn't popularize it, but his son, or Louis XIV, was quite fond of chocolate, and he was able to popularize it. In fact, giving a royal authorization to a specific chocolatiering facility in Paris. And so here we are in 1615, and chocolate is beginning to leak out of Spain and into France. Meanwhile, Italy, a bit earlier in 1605, was actually discovered chocolate on their own when they had an ambassador to El Salvador encounter chocolate and send some home himself. Let's see. Soon after this, in about 1657, a Frenchman brought chocolate all the way to London, and he opened the first of what was known as a chocolate house in London there. And chocolate houses, for those of you who don't know, which really you should know, no you shouldn't, were essentially glorified gambling houses.
Ooh.
These were the pits and dens of corruption in London, and I'm not exaggerating, because this is where nobles and the high class were hobnobbed around, sharing their secrets and their gossip and gambling away their entire fortunes on many occasions. And all the while, they sipped at these probably overpriced chocolate products that were considered luxurious, and so obviously they had to have them, as many as they could.
Who cares if we're broke? We have chocolate.
And in fact, the man Horace Walpole, son of Robert Walpole, who some of you may know as the person who single-handedly embezzled the entire London economy on his own, actually frequented many of these chocolate houses. And the chocolate houses actually were like exclusive clubs where the most powerful people in London met quite regularly. And it said that even the king feared their power, but such accounts are disputed. But this gave Europe and England and France and pretty much everyone who wanted chocolate a little bit of a problem. They couldn't grow chocolate. Since chocolate was a tropical tree that grew in Mesoamerica, they didn't have the right climate for it. And so it remained a luxury item. But soon this led to some rather unfortunate happenings, which would be the gigantic chocolate plantations that began to crop up in Brazil and the other parts of America. These were very much like the sugar plantations, and in fact possibly more brutal, since there had to be things like machetes used to cut down the pods, and they had to be hacked open through thick rinds, and it was an entire process that was very difficult and time-consuming and was not pleasant work, even if it wasn't provided by slave labor. But this premium product was sold at a premium, and it was grown quite commonly in many of the countries that were exploited.
Wish I could breathe.
And first, before we move on, it actually happened in... I have to keep consulting my notes. Also, I almost forgot to mention, chocolate at this time was not just a drink. We're moving on into the 1670s, and at this point it had become rather common in Italy and France, and rather than as a drink, they were beginning to use it as a spice. And while some of you might have thought of it as a drink, I doubt that any of you thought of chocolate as a spice. And so they ground it into things like beef and filet mignon, and mix it into sauces. In fact, has anyone ever had agrodolce sauce?
What?
Agro what?
Agrodolce. Sweet and sour sauce?
Oh, yeah,
Oh.
probably.
Chocolate was actually a huge part of sweet and sour sauce and was how it was first made. And I believe made to this day. So, fun fact you probably didn't know. But chocolate was in everything. In cuisine, from ravioli to lasagna to beef to stewed vegetables. It might have been rather insane. There were some contemporaries of the chefs there that actually made fun of the trend of making everything. But there was a reason for this, and that's because chocolate was considered a health food. And so since it was eaten by royalty, people began to spread rumors that it was something that would improve every aspect of you. It would make you feel better. It would give you that glow that's associated with alcohol without making you drunk, unless you mix it with alcohol, which they often did.
So essentially, it's a cures what ails you. It doesn't matter what ails you, it'll cure it.
Exactly. It would do everything. It would improve your heart. It would change your sex life. It would make every aspect of your life better. Of course it doesn't, but did that matter to the people selling it? No. Let's see. Yes, chocolate was in everything, to the point where it was rather ridiculous. And about a decade later, in 1680, the scourge of chocolate houses actually made its way to Boston.
Nice.
Over in America. And actually, incidentally, a number of years later, in 1750, Benjamin Franklin actually standardized chocolate as rations. 6 pounds of chocolate for every soldier as rations.
Good man. Good man.
Yes, and that chocolate ration, though I don't believe in the same amount, is still present to this day. But this was back before chocolate was actually very good. Because it was this next slide? It was only in 1776. What important thing happened that year? Scream it, yell it. What happened in 1776 that was important?
Declaration of Independence.
Wrong! What's really important is that the first industrial chocolate grinders were put into action.
Oh, we were way off.
That is truly the most important thing to note.
Yeah.
And so these industrial chocolate grinders were made in Italy. And this allowed the process of making chocolates to be a lot easier, at least once the chocolate beans actually made it to where the industrial facilities were. But it wasn't until much later, until around 1875 that milk chocolate was invented, and 1879 when conching was invented.
Conching?
Conching, I'll explain in just a moment.
Okay.
So before conching, solid chocolate was very gritty in a very unpleasant way, which made it unpopular. People bought these patties that were kind of buttery and made of the ground chocolate that they could dissolve in drinks, but when it was actually refined into something that was purely solid that they were supposed to eat, disgusting. No one wanted to have something gritty unless you were a noble, because nobles aren't smart. They knew it's popular. But eventually, conching was developed. And this conching was a 72-hour process of constant heating and constant mixing in the air that would begin to gradually break down the grit that was inside this chocolate and would actually make it smooth and succulent and delicious. And if they did for smooth as a baby's face, Jasmine. Very smooth and very
Damn smooth.
And so with the advent of chocolate, of conching in 1879, we've reached 1880 and we finally have chocolate that resembles something that we would actually eat today. But before conching, there is something that I didn't mention. So, does anyone know something that happened in 1812?
A war.
A war.
I know for sure.
A very important war, at least for the chocolate industry, and for a number of people. A war that made it a little bit difficult to export massive amounts of cocoa beans from America. And so this left Europe with a quandary. Where's our chocolate? Because no one wants to live without chocolate. What kind of loser's existence is that?
We all saw that episode of SpongeBob. We all saw it.
And so it was in 1812 that the supply of chocolate was cut off to Europe. And no one liked that. And so what actually happened was Christian missionaries, I almost said mercenaries.
Hey, is there much of a difference?
Christian missionaries. I swear I'm competent. I swear I know what I'm talking about. I'm just very tired. In 1820, Christian missionaries brought chocolate over to Africa, and specifically Ghana and the Ivory Coast. And chocolate, they weren't actually able to grow it all that well, for one specific reason.
Climate.
They didn't know how.
That's even more effective.
Yes. And so it wasn't until 1860 that, wrong date. It wasn't until, did I not write that down?
Possibly not.
It wasn't until about 60 years later, in around 1880, that they actually, that someone actually went over to America and found out how to grow cocoa beans, and brought that knowledge back to actually successfully grow cocoa. And so the cocoa began to spread in America in Africa, began to spread in Africa as a wonderful luxury export good that soon many of the economies began to rely on, which was the norm for those countries that were pretty much dominated by Europe. And so that led to, along with the other things such as gold export and spices, led to some of the kind of economic reliance upon Europe that really defined Africa for a large amount of its history. But it worked out, kind of, sort of, in that people were able to make chocolate and make the ends meet. And that's what's really important. Not the oppression of massive thousands upon thousands of people. It's chocolate that matters.
Oh, yeah.
Da-da-da.
Oh, shoot. I did not.
And where does that leave us? Meanwhile, things like Ganesh. Anyone who speaks French, I'm terribly sorry for that pronunciation.
I think it's ganache.
Ganache.
Yeah.
Ganache was invented in 1860, which was a chocolate cream that was used to fill truffles. And generally, with the advent of better solid chocolate, more and more chocolate began to make its way into the market. In fact, the 19th century can kind of be thought of as the century of chocolate. Because this is when pretty much all of the companies that we know of today began to sprout up. Things like Toblerone to Cadbury.
Hershey's.
No,
to
Toblerone.
to
Toblerone's
Cadbury
okay.
to many other places began to. I'm very sorry. Began to produce chocolate and began to produce their own kinds of chocolate. And let's see. And after 1879, when this real chocolate, delicious chocolate, was developed, we had the 1893 and the Chicago World Fair. And that is when Milton Hershey attended the World Fair and encountered chocolate making equipment that came from Europe. And shortly after, in the 1900s, when cars began to become much more common, suddenly you were able to transport massive amounts of chocolate over massive amounts of distances fairly easily. And so the consumer market began to really grow in earnest. And then we go to 1920. 1920 was the first ever chocolate bar. The first.
I'll bet it does not taste as good as it did then as it does as it would right now.
There's some ingredients they use to like ban now, like FDA.
Yep.
Fun fact,
History.
Fun fact, you could probably at many points in time buy cocaine chocolate.
Well, I mean, Coca-Cola had cocaine in it, so
Yeah, it
there's
did.
that.
It's only natural. You have something, you put cocaine in it.
Exactly. Make it better.
It's the natural order of things.
Don't do school, stay in drugs, kids.
Did you just say those?
Yes, he did. Okay, onwards, back with the presentation, because I can tell we're getting wildly off topic.
So, I just heard a question, what shape was it in before bars? And blocks. Just these
So bars, but thicker.
these massive kind of spongy blocks, generally, were how they first came in, and later they would be just giant blocks of chocolate. Something that it's kind of a shame that they stopped doing the blocks of chocolate. Don't you want a block of chocolate rather than a bar?
My only issue with blocks of chocolate is that they're really hard to bite into,
Nice.
and they will break your teeth if you accidentally put them in the fridge.
That's why you take an axe to it.
Yeah,
Inch chocolate.
Alright. And then
it's chocolate.
about 20 years after 1920, when the first chocolate bar was made, in 1937, chocolate chips were popularized as part of chocolate chip cookies. And 4 years after that, 1941, companies like Nestle began to sell chocolate chips proper. And that leads us... Oh, that's not important. And chocolate is everywhere. There's films like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There's the thing that Mr. Benjamin Franklin put into place that's still in place today, chocolate rations. You have chocolate during holidays. You have chocolate cookies, chocolate bunnies. Chocolate is everywhere. And now we have our modern world of chocolate, where we have things like Kit Kats, Mars bars, chocolate cream eggs, all kinds of delicious things. But yes, Bill?
How do you eat a Kit Kat?
With your mouth.
One bite.
The entire
You just detach your jaw and eat it like a snake.
Were you mean by the truth, cost, and story? What's the story behind the Kit Kat?
Well, the story behind the Kit Kat is just generally the journey of chocolate back from where it was in the 1500s to where it is today. And the true cost is I'm about to talk about that. So, you know slavery?
Yeah.
What's that?
Oh my God, Bill.
So, a little problem about chocolate, kind of a big problem about chocolate, is that it's still slavery.
Oh,
That's
There's still slave plantations that are set up, and also there are plantations which kidnap children from surrounding countries
that's messed up.
and have them work on these cocoa farms for the rest of their lives.
Oh.
And yeah, that's bad. there are journalists which have tried to report on this. There have been several reports, several journalists which have mysteriously gone missing in places like Ghana and the Ivory Coast. And so that's sinister. There's more information about that online. There are people that are trying to expose this corruption, but the chocolate that even we eat today still comes from slavery, still comes from slave labor. Yes, Jasmine?
Wait, so what part of the chocolate making process is still needed? It still needs to be done by humans.
Harvesting?
Oh, yeah.
Mostly harvesting. This is in part because of the 1980 stock market crash that set the stage for the already unstable economies in Ghana and the Ivory Coast to be crippled even more. And so one of their main forms, up to 30% of their income comes from chocolate. And so if it cuts into their profits, they can't allow it. And now we still have slavery. Isn't that lovely?
Yeesh.
And so that's a kind of bitter note, almost bittersweet. I'm sorry, I'm making stupid jokes. I'm making stupid jokes, but when I started off on this presentation, I didn't know how deep this would go or how much slavery was still existing in the world. And it's a lot more than I'm comfortable with, personally.
I think a lot more than a lot of people are comfortable with.
Yeah.
And so, but chocolate has changed over the years, from a bean that was made into a weird drink, which you can still get some places, but I've never had it, to a powdered form, which could be shipped across long distances, and was popular in places like London and all over the world, into finally bars that we can actually recognize as chocolate and enjoy. And that's chocolate. Questions?
I have a comment.
Yes.
Okay, do you know the history behind M&M?
No.
Okay,
Wait.
so
Was it made for wartime because it melted? It wouldn't melt?
yeah, they wanted something that wouldn't melt during World War I and II. So someone invented, why not have a hard piece of chocolate shaped like a little dab of whatever? And yeah, they used it so that it wouldn't melt for a longer period of time.
Any other questions and comments? Devin.
Wait, so you said that chocolate had its origins in South America, yet it was first used by the Olmecs. How did it migrate up to the Yucatan, or at least Mexico?
Think.
That I don't know, but I do know that was a widely traded commodity amongst the people. But I did exaggerate slightly when I said South America. It would be South and Middle America.
Okay.
And South and Central America.
See, they probably had contact with each other and stuff.
And any other questions or comments? One thing I forgot to mention is the reason why the Spanish Inquisition was incredibly important for the spread of chocolate. Does anyone have any guesses?
All the Muslims and Jews that kicked out brought their chocolate making recipes with them?
What was that?
All the Muslims and Jews that were kicked out brought their chocolate making recipes with them?
Yes, actually. And so, and so this was in 1536 when the Spanish Inquisition was cracking down harder on Jews and Muslims, and the Portuguese Inquisition, which most people don't talk about, was actually starting up.
Portuguese Inquisition? I didn't even.
Basically the same thing, but it's Western.
I didn't even know they had one though. Is the thing.
And so Jews fleeing Jewish merchants that were fleeing this persecution came to Western France and began to spread the chocolate secrets and chocolate itself, because through their merchant contacts with the general population. And this was how the first kind of consumer chocolate began to take hold. And that was something that I forgot to mention or put in the presentation, but I found it interesting. And does anyone else have anything else to add?
Any more comments? Any more comments? No more
Does
comments?
anyone want chocolate?